Welcome to the Jobs and Work podcast. If you're like most Americans, you spend a significant amount of your time working. In fact, we spend more time at our jobs than anywhere else. But how often do we really talk about work in America? On this podcast, the Work for Change team will. Work for Change LLC is a team of social scientists, thought leaders, and digital storytellers who dig into the critical issues affecting American workers and workplaces today. Our podcast is co-hosted by Dr. Kendra Jason and myself, Dr. Chris Maycumber. We'll also bring guests onto the show who reflect the diversity of the American workforce. We are so excited for you to join us as we lead the efforts to humanize the workplace by building dignity and equity into jobs, work, and organizations. Please subscribe to the podcast and share us with your friends and family. You can learn more about Work for Change at workforchangellc.com. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Jobs and Work podcast, where we talk about all things related to jobs and work. This is episode number 21, and I'm your co-host, Chris Maycumber.
And I'm co-host Kendra Jason.
And today we have a very special guest on our show.
Today we have Sarah Morgan. Sarah Morgan has been practicing human resources for 20 years. And so she's the Chief Excellence Officer at BuzzARooney LLC, where she provides consulting and coaching surrounding inclusive and equitable organizational culture and practical people-centric leadership. So Sarah still serves as active in HR as the head of human resources for a national retail service conglomerate headquartered in Raleigh, North Carolina. So in 2011, Sarah burst onto the scene, the social media scene that is, under the pen name BuzzARooney with her blog, The Buzz on HR. 10 years later, that pen name is gone, but Sarah is still going strong with over 10,000 readers each month. So she's the curator of hashtag Black Blogs Matter, hashtag Black Pods Matter, hashtag Times Up HR, and hashtag Anti-Racist HR movements. And she's also the creator and host of Leading in Color podcast, a show centering on cultivating positive workplace experiences through diversity, inclusion, and social consciousness. So over this time, Sarah has amassed 30,000 followers across LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Also being named the best HR practitioner, blogs, top women in HR tech, and Global Voices of HR list for consecutive years. She has been featured in Black Enterprise, Madame Noor, Fast Company, CNN, and more. And we also have Sarah's contact information, her social media links, and her direct link to BuzzARooneyLLC.com below. So please check her out. It was a long intro, but I could not take out of it because it's just so fantastic to understand where you've come from and where you are. So welcome to the podcast, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and I appreciate that intro. Very enthusiastic. I appreciate it.
Yeah. You know, one reason it's enthusiastic is, so I've been following Sarah for a long time. I know Sarah has been in HR for a long time. And a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about HR. They think it's like stuffy and cold, and it's all just about complaints and payroll. But in following you on social media and knowing what your approach is in helping people really understand HR is so much more, and how you built this enterprise around using HR as a vehicle to make workplaces better. And so, of course, that's why we have you on the show. But can you just start the conversation by letting us know what made you get into HR personally?
So I am a second generation human resources practitioner. My mom was actually in HR. And so when I graduated college, 20 years ago, 21 years ago, when I graduated college, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I went into college thinking that I wanted to be an attorney, and
Uh-huh.
I spent the summer between my junior and senior year interning for the Attorney General's office, and I was like, "Oh, this ain't Law and Order." I don't think I want to do this after all. And so I changed majors. And then the next thing I knew, I was graduating and I didn't really have an idea of what I wanted to do. And so I spent the summer doing like temp jobs here and there, just trying to see
Yeah.
what might spark my interest. And then finally, a recruiting coordinator's position came open, and I started that as a temp and then got hired full time, and I just loved it, and the rest was kind of history. So I started out in light industrial staffing
Hmm.
and staffing for production workers, forklift drivers, like really blue collar
Yeah.
work, short term and long term temp jobs, and then moved into light industrial retail and then food service, and now I'm back in retail services. And so all of my career has been spent in these kind of hybrid of blue collar corporate spaces, which I love because I
Hmm.
feel like it keeps me really grounded with like what is going on with normal everyday people.
Right.
And it's been particularly great during the pandemic
Hmm.
because I've been able to witness what's been happening with like our essential workers and the challenges
Hmm.
of going through this pandemic with that, and what that had, and being able to serve and support people during this time, rather than just worrying about like my own stuff of working from home and dealing with
Hmm.
kids and remote learning, but seeing what it's actually like in the thick of the pandemic to have people that are having to go to work every day and dealing with all of those elements has just really been humbling. So I love what it is that I do, and 20 years into it, I don't see myself quitting anytime soon. So
So, can you share with us, Sarah, for excuse me, for people who might not understand what it's like to work in HR in general, but then during COVID, like what were some of the challenges that HR folks had to address in COVID
yeah,
for you
so the
specifically?
biggest thing was just about the navigation of shifting, for particularly for those of us in like office positions, like shifting
Hmm.
into remote work. And that's still something that we're facing now as we're starting to reopen, and now we're wanting people to come back into the office. So that right now is like the biggest issue for most folks. For me, we never stopped working. And so for my team, we never stopped going into the office. Particularly for us, it was challenging because so we work in retail services, and within the retail services space, obviously the retailers were not opening. So our employees were essential workers. Some of our projects are not local. So we had employees who were traveling, and they're traveling into places that are COVID hotspots. They're
Hmm.
traveling into places with a lot of restrictions. So some of them had to be like tested before they could enter that particular state or area. And then we're having to find vendors that can do that testing during
Hmm.
times where testing was not readily available. And then how, like, that's not their expense. So how do we pay for that, from a distance during a time where our volume is down and we're trying to manage those costs? Like, it was just a lot. There was a certain point where we had to do furlough of some of our employees in the office, going through the process of making those kinds of decisions and deciding whether or not we furlough people versus asking them to take pay reductions. Like, they're excruciatingly difficult positions, but that's really what human resources is. Like, we live at the intersection of people's work and like all of their personal stuff. Like, we're
Yeah.
dealing with their leave, we're dealing with their benefits, we're dealing with their pay when they have difficult issues, with their coworkers or with their boss, we're the place that they come to. We're always at that intersection of the hard stuff, of work and life. And so we have to just continue to soldier through it with a tremendous amount of like grace and a heart for people.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times what you were describing, Kendra, is that we get down in the compliance of it.
Mhm.
Because Lord knows, like I've heard just like ridiculous amounts of crazy stories. Like, how many grandmas do you have and why are they all dying? Like it's crazy.
Yeah.
But you just don't know. Like you
Right.
can't lose your heart and your compassion for people when you're living and working at the intersections of their life. Like, you see people in some of their deepest, darkest
Yeah.
moments, working in HR, and it's easy to let that make you become jaded and make
Yeah.
you like cling to the rules and the regulations because you don't want to feel like you're getting taken advantage of. And for me, I'm very like laser focused on not doing that, on making sure that I continue to like look at people and try to be like, okay, well, what would I do, if I was in that
Mhm.
situation, or what would I want someone to give to me? And even more importantly, like asking that individual, like giving them empowerment and agency to say, this is what I need. And
Yeah.
sometimes the response back to that is like, we can't do that, like we're
Mhm.
not going to be able to approve this particular thing that you're asking for. But at least it gives me a target, and it gives that person a sense of control during a time where a lot of times they're feeling like out of control, and
Mhm.
they're waiting for their employer to tell them. Like, people are afraid of losing their jobs,
Right.
consistently. It's like, if I ask for this schedule accommodation, they're going to fire me. If I ask for this time off, they're going to, like, people live in that like heightened state. And I don't want people to feel that when they walk into my office or when they approach someone on my team. I want them to feel like they're going to get compassion, and that we're going to do our best to try to, accommodate to the point that it's reasonable, so that on top of whatever stressful life situation they're going through, they're not also now having to worry about like what's going to happen with my job.
Yeah. So at Work for Change, so at our consulting agency or services, one of the things, because I am particularly so interested in, if you will, our most vulnerable workers. So these are, like you said, low wage, essential
Mhm.
workers with chronic illness, older workers, Black and
Mhm.
women workers. There's a steady message that I'm giving to not just workers, but also to management, that there needs to be more communication and relationship between workers and human resources, because human
Mhm.
resources offer so much, but workers don't really know and understand all of the resources and avenues that they have to help them make their work experiences better. Because
Mhm.
we do have this idea that I want to stay under, the radar. I don't want people to know that I'm sick, or I don't want people to think I'm a problem, or I don't want to go and, like you say, face some type of repercussion for being honest about my work family
Mhm.
life situation. And so I'll give you credit for something just really quickly. So last week, Chris, I think it was last week, Chris and I did a podcast on violence in the workplace. And I totally got this idea from you. You did it years and years and years ago. I don't know if you probably remember, but you were, even though I study like work, I never really thought about violence and work, because I
Mm.
don't study violence specifically, like as an expert. I study the workplace. And I remember, I think it was a blog that you wrote. I'm not sure, because it was so many years ago, but it had such a lasting impression on me, because you talked about violence in the workplace and women in the workplace in
Mhm.
this sense. And so however many years ago, later, that's been on my mind, and I've incorporated that, especially with Chris, who's our expert on interpersonal violence. I was like, I really want that to be central to
Yeah.
work for change, because when you brought it to my attention through your social media, it may have been small to someone else, but I picked that up as something that's a huge piece. And I just wanted to let you know that, your work and your communication style has an impactful and lasting impression. And I just wanted to
Thank
let you know
you.
that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I am, as a survivor of domestic violence, I did that article a few years ago just to share my story,
Mhm.
and let people know what have when I went through one of the most difficult violent episodes, what
Mhm.
my job did to support me, and also some things that they didn't do that well that
Right.
I would recommend that other people not do, because we don't realize how many people are going through those situations, and how difficult that is.
Mhm.
Fortunately, like in the meantime, we've seen a lot more legal protections given to people who are needing time off in order to pursue orders and court and move and all of that kind of stuff. But once upon a time, that did not exist. It didn't fall under FMLA. Some
Mhm.
employers don't have necessarily personal leave, and so you're finding people at this, again, intersection. And for those of us in HR who get very trapped in compliance mindset,
Right.
it's like, well, I don't have anything to put this under, so I don't know what to do with you. And it's like, that's not how it is that we're going to treat people. So here are some things that you can do,
Right.
to from a compliance standpoint and from a compassion standpoint, to
Mhm.
make sure that those individuals, when they're in those moments, are definitely feeling supported. And
Mhm.
I've tried to do that. Like I did that during Charlottesville was another one of those moments where I was like, somebody's got to step up and say something. And those types of blog posts and things
Mhm.
like that are really what led me to starting my own business. And that's kind of what like birthed BuzzARooney, because I wanted so much for those things to be things that I could communicate with, not just in my own organization, but things that, so I work with human resources professionals as a coach.
Okay.
I go into organizations and I train, and then I go into organizations and I do analysis on their workplace culture. And I talk with them about the ways that they can be more inclusive and
Mhm.
what most people would call now progressive,
Right.
in terms of their policies surrounding how they manage people.
Mhm.
And it's great for me to be able to partner with organizations that way and to just continue to help move workplaces forward, because I think that's the direction that we're going in as a society. Like, I'm a bit of a history nerd. Kendra knows this. And so
Mhm.
from reading, when the pandemic started, I also suffer from generalized anxiety disorder. And so,
Mhm.
one of the things for me, from a mental health standpoint, that helps is research. Now,
Mhm.
truthfully, I can get too deep down in the barrel of research, but I try to, because it helps me kind of
Mhm.
feel a semblance of control to know, okay, well, this is what happened before. So, even though history has, times have changed and we're more technologically advanced, people and the way that we behave, you guys know, we don't evolve that much. And so I'm
Mhm.
like, all right, well, if this is what people did in the pandemic 100 years ago, then
Mm.
this is what we're likely to see today. One of the things that I found most interesting and that I've been talking about a lot lately is a lot of what people experienced in the pandemic in the 1920s is what pushed us into the Industrial Revolution in the 1930s and 40s that led to a lot of the legislation that we now rely on today.
Mhm.
The workers' comp and OSHA standards came out of that industrial revolution, which was people saying, listen, we just went through a pandemic,
Right.
people died. I'm not going back to work in no factory and falling off a building with like, y'all need to protect me. Like, child labor laws came out of that. The 40-hour work week, like a lot of the things that we've come to rely on as just normal today are things that started in the labor movement in the early 1900s, coming off of that pandemic. And I think we're going to see the same thing happening now. And we're already starting to see those rumblings as we start to reopen. Offices want to move people out of working from home back into working for offices, and people are like, I don't think I'm I don't think I'm doing that. So we're already starting to see that revolution beginning to happen. And I think it's important to try to, like, for organizations that want to continue to be progressive, continue to bring in top talent, to continue to be inclusive spaces, to keep your finger on the pulse of that and figure out, what you can do.
I love this history piece of it, Sarah. So given that you've worked 20 years in HR, what are some of the big shifts you've seen?
I think the move toward more total wellness is one of the biggest shifts that I've seen. Like, I love that to see organizations focusing more than on just like physical health. For the longest time, like I can remember when I first got into HR and I started working in the area of benefits. When you talked about wellness, the only thing people had anything to say about was smoking cessation. Like, we got to stop people from smoking. That was it. Like, that was and lose weight. That was it, in terms of your benefit programs. And now we're seeing people talking about mental health. We're seeing people talk about financial health, which leads to so many other issues. And so it's great to see organizations expanding the definition of what wellness means to be looking more at the total human. That we're not just talking about losing weight, we're also talking about how do we eat, for better nourishment, and not just talking about eat less, but actually like eat better, talking about mental health more readily. We did a session at my job about cybersecurity and about like protecting yourself and your reputation online, which, 5-10 years ago, social media was still fairly new. And I don't necessarily know that people would have thought about it. And not just in the mind of like protect your passwords, but like also what information is out there that could, make you a victim of stalking and those sorts of things. And then how could it, impact your reputation in a job search, or in you're trying to get promoted or something like that, like just managing your overall reputation. So I love seeing that we are doing that, even to the point of like career development and encouraging people to continue their education, even if it's not necessarily even getting a degree, but just learning more about a specific program. And I know there are companies out there with partnerships with like local community colleges. So if you just want to learn, take a cooking class or take a sewing class. Like, there are so many allowing your employees to do that, and you're paying for it, for them to take on their passions or complete some other piece of their education that they weren't able to do before. Like, seeing those sorts of things happen, compared to where things were at the beginning of my career, I think is really great and something that I definitely hope to see continue.
I have a question that people talk about all the time, Sarah, about millennials as a workforce. Is there any truth to that hype in terms of that demographic of younger people coming into the workplace being harder to manage, being harder to please? Like, what's your, is that just like a stereotype from older, grumpier people? Because you hear that a lot.
Yeah.
And I've heard it from some HR people who say like millennials are a whole other, kind of beast to try to work with from an HR perspective. So
yeah, I think it's hateration in the dancery personally.
Yeah.
I do. Because so a couple things. First, we're in a place that we've never been before from a work standpoint, where we have at least 5 generations happening in workplaces all at the same time. Usually there's 3, but we're at a point people are working longer, and then people are starting careers earlier. So you've got those 2 phenomenon happening at the same time. And now we've got like more people in the workplace. And so there's much more of like an age span in our workplaces than what there was before. But we use the word millennial to describe, it's like the catchword for all young people. And the reality is millennials are 30. Like millennials have minivans and children and whole families. So like, let's stop using that word to just describe like what we mean as like younger workers. Most of my team at work is in the younger generation, the younger millennials, and now we're starting to see Gen Z enter the workforce. And just like all of us, they enter the workforce with like a sense of idealism about how things should be, that they want to see come to fruition. And I think that it comes from really like a couple things. First is your education. If you've gone through, particularly those who have graduated college, when you've gone through that, like you come into the workforce in a lot of cases with this like idealized idea of how things are supposed to work, this textbook idea of how things are supposed to work, and then you get there and it's not like that, and it's like, hold up, why are we not making this like the textbook? The textbook is good, and it is like the theories are good. Like, why are we not following this? So you have that going on. But the other thing that I don't think we give enough credit to is, and I think this is true for our generation as well, we watched our parents, baby boomers and the silent generation, we watched our parents work for decades and decades at jobs that mistreated them, that did not pay them fairly, that they did not find joy in. And I feel like our generations are just like, nah, bro, we're not doing this. We're not working like this. And either we are going to like leave and keep leaving until we find a place that's going to, treat us fairly and give us the flexibility to live life and to learn and grow that we all say that we want and need and deserve, or we're going to stay here and keep demanding that you live up to the values that you espouse and the things that you told us that you're going to do. I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think those of us who are in those, us Gen Xers, us boomers that are still in the workplace, and there's still a few silent generation folks, hanging out. Those of us in like the older generations, like I think there's an opportunity for us to pause and kind of listen to that, because it's not like it won't benefit us too. Like greater flexibility in the workplace, greater support in the workplace, all of those things will trickle up, down, out, So let's change the game while we have the opportunity to do so. I don't think that's a bad thing. So when you're rigid and when you're afraid of change, then yeah, you're going to look and say, oh, these lofty goals, they're so difficult to manage. But overall, I found working with the younger millennials, the Gen Zs, that what they really want is communication, and openness, like that openness and vulnerability that we talk about in when we, reference the Brene Browns of the world. Like people really are looking for that. And I don't think that's a bad thing. So, so I'm not mad at it. I know that there are still a lot of folks who feel like it's too far of a shift from, but I think ultimately it will get us to a place of greater inclusion and equity. And those are great things. I'm here for all of that, both for myself, as a Black woman with invisible disability and children and all the things.
Yeah.
And then also as a human resources professional who's watched people really struggle with the intersection of work and life. And so I'm always going to be supportive of anything that's going to make that intersection work more smoothly.
Right. Great.
So one of the many things that I love about Sarah Morgan today is, again, in following you over a number of years, I know you as a professional, but how you have branched out and, built these different avenues to communicate and to help workplaces and people have better work experiences. It so aligns, and I can't say I wasn't motivated or inspired by that, that inspiration to take your job, to take your degree, and then turn it into something that can work for other people, not just
Mm-mm.
working for a company, but working for yourself and communicating in a way to the masses that you can get these messages out about equity and fairness and justice that transcends what you can do in one workplace. And so
Yeah.
I just wanted to, again, you have, I know you have the podcast, you have your blogs and
Mm-hmm.
all of that. But before we go, I did want to give you an opportunity to, you and Chris just had a conversation about, people coming into human resources, people, starting out. So if someone, and there are many, many people who are interested in HR,
Mm-hmm.
what general advice do you have for someone who is interested in starting a career in human resources?
I definitely encourage anyone interested in starting a career in human resources, first and foremost, to educate themselves. And I say that not necessarily meaning go to college, but
Okay.
look at community colleges. There are courses you can take. There are certificate courses that you can take online to give you like that fundamental base, because there's a lot of legal stuff that goes in the underbelly and the foundation of what it is that we do from HR that's important to know.
Mhm.
And then the second thing is be willing to start small. So much because it's a practice, right? And so just like with any other practice, it takes years to get to that level of mastery. And as much as we want to dive straight in and make a difference, you really need time to like study the lay of the land.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that means understanding like the administrative functions that go alongside and again part of the foundation of it, studying business is just the business or the industry that you're working in, and just finding ways to be compassionate towards people, which is
Yeah.
why I think that DEI aspect is
Mhm.
so important, understanding diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the ways our systemic issues seep into and have impact on the workplace. If you want to be a part of the human resources of the future, then
Mhm.
having those things in your arsenal are going to be critical. And then the last thing I would say is definitely to have a mentor. There
Mhm.
are excellent human resources groups out there. Human resources practitioners of color is one that I belong to. The National Association of African American Human Resources Professionals being another. The I know that everyone speaks about SHRM, and
Mhm.
they're always going to be a great foundational place for you to go
Mhm.
for information. But also don't forget about like your local SHRM chapters, because you're going to find a lot of good networking opportunity and a good opportunity for you to build community. So having those mentors, having that network, people that you trust, that you can talk to, that can continue to help you sometimes just deal with the crazy stories of what's happening to you in your workplace is going to be crucial too.
Such great advice. Thank you for your time this morning, Sarah.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you. And, we encourage, one message that we always give at Work for Change as we have our Starting Your Own Business workshop. We have one coming up this weekend. It's a 2-part series. Is that you don't have to leave your current job to start your own business. You can stay gainfully employed and create your own pathway. So you can do both. It's not either or. So we strongly encourage you to look us up. We are on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and of course, you found us here on YouTube. So please like, subscribe, and share so that we can work to make the world of work better.